The red tracer rounds flashed past his wing like deadly fireflies in the morning mist. Lieutenant Colonel Leo Moon felt his heart skip a beat as the second round whistled by even closer. He had spotted dozens of trains during his month flying with the 404th Fighter Group. But this one was shooting back. What Moon discovered that March day in 1945 would change everything. German engineers had started mounting anti-aircraft guns directly onto railroad cars. The hunters were about to become the hunted. Let's go back to where this story really begins. Not in the skies over occupied Europe, but in the factories of Long Island. Alexander Kartveli had a crazy idea. He wanted to build a fighter around the massive Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine. His colleagues thought he was nuts. They warned him he was creating a dinosaur. Kartveli's response became legendary. "It will be a dinosaur, but it will be a dinosaur with good proportions." The numbers told the whole story. The P-47 Thunderbolt weighed nearly 9 tons when fully loaded. That made it heavier than some medium bombers. Its 18-cylinder engine cranked out over 2,000 horsepower. 4 massive propeller blades could pull it to altitudes where German fighters couldn't breathe. But the real punch came from its guns. 8 50-caliber Browning machine guns, 4 in each wing. They could unleash over 100 rounds per second. With 3,400 rounds of ammunition, a pilot had 30 seconds of continuous firing time. That's an eternity in aerial combat. When the first Thunderbolts reached Britain in late 1942, veteran pilots took one look and cracked jokes. The big fighter was twice the weight of a Spitfire. 5 feet more wingspan. 4 times the internal volume. Some pilots joked they could hide inside the massive fuselage if attacked. Those same pilots would soon learn something important. What the Thunderbolt lacked in grace, it made up for in raw power, and an almost supernatural ability to bring its pilot home alive. The first combat mission happened in April 1943. The big fighters struggled as high-altitude escorts at first. German Bf-109s and FW-190s could outturn them at low altitudes. But above 30,000 feet, the Thunderbolt was in a class of its own. More importantly, pilots learned a key trick. When trouble came, push the stick forward. Use that tremendous weight to dive away faster than anything with wings could follow. By late 1943, something changed. Thunderbolts started carrying bombs under their bellies. First 500-pounders, then 1,000-pound bombs. Eventually rockets that hit like artillery shells. A fully loaded P-47 could deliver nearly half the payload of a B-17 Flying Fortress. The transformation was complete. High-altitude fighter to low-level ground attack monster. Now here's where the real story begins. By 1944, Germany's ability to fight depended entirely on its railways. Steel rails carried everything across thousands of miles of occupied territory. Tiger tanks from factories, ammunition from the Ruhr, fuel from Romanian oil fields, fresh troops from Bavarian training camps. Every day, hundreds of trains moved through France, Belgium, Holland, and Germany. They carried the lifeblood of Hitler's armies. Cut those steel arteries, and German forces would wither and die. The challenge was tricky, though. Allied planners needed to destroy the railway system without wrecking the infrastructure they'd need after D-Day. Enter an unlikely hero. A South African zoologist named Professor Zackerman, better known for studying primates in peacetime. But he'd become an expert on bomb damage during the Mediterranean campaigns. His transportation plan was brilliant. Don't just bomb the tracks. Target the vulnerable parts, locomotives, rolling stock, repair facilities, marshalling yards. RAF's Arthur Harris dismissed Zackerman as a civilian professor whose peacetime forte is the study of higher apes. American bombing advocates called it a waste of resources. Eisenhower's staff warned it might kill 160,000 French civilians. But Supreme Allied Commander Dwight Eisenhower made the tough call. The success of D-Day might depend on stopping German reinforcements, and that meant destroying the railways that would carry them. As 1944 dawned, the real railway war began. Heavy bombers hit the big targets, but it fell to fighter bombers to hunt individual trains across occupied Europe. The P-47 proved perfect for this deadly game. Its tough construction survived intense anti-aircraft fire. Its heavy guns punched through locomotive boilers like paper. Its bomb and rocket capacity gave pilots multiple ways to kill their prey. Captain Jim Ashford of the 379th Fighter Squadron learned the hard way. "You want to be fairly low," he explained to new pilots. "So your dive angle is shallow. Don't come down at 45 degrees. That means you pull out earlier and have less time to shoot." The technique was simple but deadly. Approach from behind at high speed and low altitude. Rake the entire train with machine gun fire. Pull up sharply before the explosion. But German engineers weren't sitting still. As Thunderbolt attacks got worse, they fought back. Railway cars carrying vital cargo started traveling with armed escorts. 20mm and 37mm anti-aircraft guns appeared on flat cars throughout supply trains. German gunners learned to position these mobile batteries right behind the locomotive, where attacking pilots would be most vulnerable during their runs. The first Thunderbolt pilots to meet these mobile fortresses got the shock of their lives. Those red tracers that surprised Colonel Moon were becoming common along German railway lines. What had been a straightforward mission against undefended targets became deadly aerial duels. 8-ton fighters against nimble anti-aircraft crews who'd learned to lead their targets. Lieutenant Neil Worley of the 365th Fighter Group found out just how dangerous things had become. Over Belgium in May 1944, after unsuccessfully bombing a railway bridge, he spotted a German troop train. "I made a high-speed pass on a train loaded with artillery and crew," he recalled. "A whole battalion came up out of the railroad cars and headed for foxholes." Lining up for a second attack, Worley missed the steel support cables from a nearby water tower. "I made a pass at the locomotive, but ran into the steel cable, wrapped about 40 feet of it around the prop." The Thunderbolt's legendary toughness saved his life, but the incident showed the new hazards facing train-hunting pilots. As the transportation plan gained momentum through spring 1944, the statistics became remarkable. Allied aircraft were destroying German rolling stock faster than it could be replaced. By June 1944, the Deutsche Reichsbahn reported marauding Allied fighters were wrecking over 40 trains per day. This destruction rate was crushing German locomotive production. Repair crews found themselves scattered across the countryside, clearing train wrecks and patching track under constant air attack threat. The human cost mounted on both sides. German locomotive crews, many experienced railroaders who'd worked the same routes for decades, died at their controls. Allied pilots flying low and slow for accuracy faced intense ground fire from increasingly sophisticated defenses. But the strategic impact was undeniable. As D-Day approached, German commanders couldn't move reserves efficiently. Reinforcements arrived days late, or not at all. Ammunition trains sat smoking in railway yards hundreds of miles from their destinations. The intricate logistics network that let Germany fight a multi-front war was unraveling under relentless air assault. The transportation plan's effectiveness became crystal clear after Normandy. German reserves that should have counterattacked the beachheads within hours found themselves stranded, their rail transport destroyed or diverted. Field Marshal Rommel complained bitterly that he couldn't move his panzer divisions because Allied fighters controlled every major railway line in western France. As Allied forces broke out of Normandy in August 1944, P-47s found an even more target-rich environment. German forces, cut off by rapid Allied advance, tried to evacuate by rail. These retreat movements offered Thunderbolt pilots something rare: multiple trains operating in daylight on the same lines, often with minimal anti-aircraft protection. The slaughter that followed became legend. On a single day in late August, pilots from multiple groups reported destroying entire trains loaded with retreating German troops and equipment. Gun camera footage captured locomotives exploding in spectacular fireballs. Freight cars loaded with ammunition detonated in chain reactions visible for miles. Tank cars sent towering columns of black smoke into the summer sky. But the most telling statistic was the one German logistics officers dreaded most: the trains that simply stopped running. As the breakout gained momentum, entire sections of the French railway network fell silent. Not because tracks were bombed, though many were, but because there weren't enough locomotives, freight cars, or experienced crews to operate them. The transportation plan had achieved what years of strategic bombing failed to accomplish. It had broken the German war machine's ability to sustain itself in the field. As autumn 1944 arrived, P-47 groups moved eastward with advancing Allied armies, into Belgium and toward the German border. The lessons learned over French railways would soon face the ultimate test. German forces were preparing one final desperate offensive. It would demand every available train to carry the men and materials needed for Hitler's last gamble in the West. The Battle of the Bulge was approaching. The Railway War was about to enter its most critical phase. December 16, 1944. Pre-dawn darkness in the Ardennes forest. German artillery erupted in thunderous barrage. Hitler's last great gamble had begun. Operation Watch on the Rhine would test every lesson learned in 8 months of railway war. As German panzer spearheads punched through American lines, success or failure would depend on one critical factor. Could the Wehrmacht move enough supplies by rail before Allied air power strangled their lines? For the first crucial days, Mother Nature fought for the Reich. Thick clouds blanketed the Ardennes. Allied air forces sat grounded on muddy airfields. P-47 Thunderbolts waited helplessly, while German supply trains moved with freedom they hadn't enjoyed in months. But the weather couldn't hold forever. December 23rd, the clouds began breaking. As winter sunlight pierced the overcast, the deep rumble of Pratt and Whitney engines echoed across Allied airfields. The 9th Air Force's fighter-bombers were about to unleash destruction that would determine Hitler's final offensive. From before sunrise to well after sundown, P-47 Thunderbolts worked over every railway line leading toward German spearheads. Their mission was simple in concept, but deadly in execution. Find every train moving toward the battle. Destroy it. The pilots climbing into cockpits that morning knew they faced a different railway war. German anti-aircraft defenses had evolved considerably. Wehrmacht engineers had standardized mounting 20 mm and 37 mm guns aboard supply trains, positioned strategically to catch attacking aircraft in devastating crossfires. First Lieutenant Leslie Bowes of the 358th Fighter Group understood these dangers. His P-47, appropriately named Blonde Trouble, bore scars from previous encounters. Near Saarbrücken, his aircraft took a direct hit from an 88mm shell. It shredded his left wing root, fuselage, and flaps. Small arms fire had shattered his canopy, left him with a skull gash requiring stitches. Yet, here he was again. December 17th, leading his flight toward Neustadt. Intelligence reported heavy German train traffic supporting the Bulge offensive. The scene below would have been familiar to any railway interdiction pilot. A German supply train wound through winter landscape. Black smoke from its locomotive marked its position against snow-covered countryside. But this was no ordinary freight train. Interspersed among cargo cars were flat cars mounting anti-aircraft guns. Their crews scanned skies for Allied fighters they knew would come. As Bose's flight dove toward their target, red tracers rose to meet them, with accuracy and intensity that spoke of hard-earned experience. The engagement epitomized the railway war's evolution. Early train attacks had been largely one-sided affairs. Undefended locomotives falling victim to concentrated machine gun fire. The Bulge period battles had become complex tactical problems, requiring split-second decisions and perfect coordination. Bose's technique reflected months of deadly trial and error. Approach fast and low to minimize exposure time. Target the locomotive first to disable mobility. Then systematically work back through the train, while avoiding mobile flak cars that could turn success into a death trap. The destructive power of 850 caliber guns firing together was devastating. Each gun fired armor-piercing incendiary rounds at nearly 800 rounds per minute. All 8 guns created a focused stream of destruction that could penetrate locomotive boilers, detonate ammunition cars, set fuel tankers ablaze in seconds. A 3-second burst sent nearly 400 rounds downrange, enough firepower to disable virtually any railway target. But German defenders were no longer passive victims. Mobile flak protection aboard supply trains caught many Thunderbolt pilots off guard. Experienced gun crews learned to lead targets and concentrate fire where attacking aircraft were most vulnerable. The 20mm and 37mm guns on railway flat cars were proven weapons. In skilled hands that knew attack patterns, they could turn routine strafing runs into deadly gauntlets. Statistics from the Bulge period told the story of intensified railway war. During the first week, when weather permitted flying, 9th Air Force P-47s flew hundreds of sorties against railway targets. Gun camera footage captured scenes of almost industrial-scale destruction. Locomotives exploding in spectacular fireballs as incendiary rounds found their mark. Ammunition cars detonating in chain reactions visible for miles. Fuel tankers sending towering smoke columns into winter sky. Yet human cost mounted on both sides. German locomotive crews, many civilian transportation workers pressed into service, faced impossible choices. Abandon trains and face court-martial, or stay at controls and risk death from the air. Many chose duty over safety, remaining at their posts even as P-47s dove with guns blazing. Allied pilots developed grudging respect for German railroaders who kept trains moving despite constant air threat. The tactical evolution during the Bulge revealed how far both sides had come. German defenders positioned mobile flak guns for maximum effectiveness, often right behind locomotives where attacking pilots were committed to runs and couldn't maneuver away from concentrated fire. They also began using decoy trains, made up of damaged or obsolete rolling stock to draw Allied attacks away from valuable targets. P-47 pilots responded with their own innovations. Skip bombing became a specialized skill, bouncing bombs into railway tunnels where trains might hide. Rocket attacks using new 5-inch high-velocity aircraft rockets let pilots engage heavily defended targets from greater distances. Coordination between multiple flights enabled complex attacks that could overwhelm German defenses through sheer firepower volume. The strategic impact became apparent as the German offensive lost momentum. Despite initial successes pushing American forces back dozens of miles, German spearheads began running short of fuel and ammunition needed to sustain advance. Panzer units that should have been racing toward the Meuse River found themselves immobilized by empty fuel tanks. Artillery batteries fell silent as ammunition supplies dwindled. The railway network supposed to feed the offensive was collapsing under relentless Allied air assault. One dramatic example occurred January 22, 1945. German forces attempted to withdraw from their furthest advance. Allied aircraft caught a retreating column at Dasburg Bridge, a critical railway crossing representing one of few remaining escape routes. The coordinated attack demonstrated devastating effectiveness of air-ground operations. As P-47s from multiple groups converged, they found not just one train, but an entire railway network choked with German equipment attempting escape eastward. Gun camera footage showed almost biblical destruction. Multiple locomotives caught in the open exploded under concentrated machine gun and rocket fire. Freight cars loaded with retreating troops and equipment burned throughout the day. Tank cars carrying precious fuel detonated in secondary explosions felt miles away. By evening, Dasburg Crossing was completely blocked, trapping remaining German forces west of the Rhine, effectively ending any hope of organized withdrawal. The psychological impact extended beyond immediate tactical effects. German soldiers witnessing supply train destruction began understanding that the Reich's transportation network was completely at Allied air power's mercy. Morale reports from German units during war's final months repeatedly mentioned the demoralizing effect of seeing supply trains destroyed before reaching front lines. For P-47 pilots, the railway campaign had become deadly routine testing skills and nerves daily. Each mission brought possibility of encountering new German defensive tactics, or finding themselves alone over hostile territory with damaged aircraft and hundreds of miles to fly home. The Thunderbolt's legendary toughness became more than just design characteristic. It became a lifeline, meaning the difference between completing missions and becoming another railway war casualty. From D-Day until VE Day, Thunderbolt pilots claimed destroying 86,000 railroad cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored fighting vehicles, 68,000 trucks. While figures might include overestimation due to fog of war, independent assessments confirmed unprecedented destruction scope and effectiveness. More telling than raw numbers was qualitative impact on German operations. By June 1944, Deutsche Reichsbahn reported Allied fighters destroying over 40 trains daily, a loss rate outstripping German locomotive and rolling stock production. Repair crews found themselves overwhelmed, ranging across German countryside clearing wrecked trains and patching damaged track. Massive loss of experienced train crews strained an already overburdened system, struggling with multi-front war transportation demands. Human stories revealed the true cost on both sides. American pilots like Colonel Leo Moon, who survived multiple encounters with train-mounted anti-aircraft guns, developed healthy respect for German defenders who'd learned to fight back effectively. German locomotive crews, many peacetime railroaders who'd worked same routes for decades, faced daily decisions about risking lives moving frontline supplies or abandoning posts and facing military justice. One particularly poignant account came from a captured German locomotive engineer. He described war's final months from his engine cab, the constant fear accompanying every trip, knowing Allied fighters could appear any moment. He described the sound of P-47 engines growing louder as big fighters dove toward his train. The helpless feeling knowing his locomotive, peacetime pride of Deutsche Reichsbahn, had become little more than a target in a deadly game he couldn't win. The technological cat-and-mouse game continued evolving through war's final months. German engineers experimented with camouflage locomotives, burning smokeless fuel to reduce air visibility. They developed rapid deployment anti-aircraft units positioned along threatened routes with minimal notice. Some trains carried smokescreen generators, creating artificial clouds concealing daylight movement. For every German innovation, Allied tactics evolved too. P-47 pilots learned approaching suspected targets from multiple directions simultaneously. Overwhelming defenses designed for single aircraft attacks. They developed tunnel attack techniques using skip bombing to bounce explosives where direct fire couldn't reach. Most importantly, they achieved coordination levels between multiple aircraft, turning individual train attacks into complex aerial ballets of destruction. As spring 1945 arrived and German resistance collapsed across all fronts, the railway campaign entered its final phase. Allied forces advancing into Germany found a systematically destroyed transportation network. Railway yards that once bustled with activity stood silent. Tracks twisted, facilities burned out. Locomotives sat abandoned where P-47 attacks caught them. Boilers punctured, cabs shattered by .50 caliber fire. Strategic vindication of the transportation plan came not just in destruction statistics, but in complete paralysis of German logistics, characterizing war's final months. German commanders found themselves unable to move reserves to threatened sectors, unable to evacuate valuable equipment from advancing Allied forces, unable to maintain even basic supply lines to remaining field units. The railway network that had once been German military power's backbone was reduced to isolated segments operating sporadically under constant air threat. When Germany surrendered May 8, 1945, Allied intelligence teams found confirmation of what P-47 pilots suspected throughout their long campaign. The destruction had been even more complete than wartime claims suggested. Entire locomotive fleets eliminated. Critical railway junctions inoperable for months at a time. The German war machine's ability to sustain itself through rail transportation was broken so thoroughly that recovery would have been impossible even if war had continued. The P-47 Thunderbolt's war against German supply trains left a legacy extending far beyond impressive destruction statistics. It demonstrated modern military forces' vulnerability to systematic logistics network attacks. It proved tactical air power properly applied could achieve strategic effects, complementing and sometimes exceeding strategic bombing campaigns. Most importantly, it showed that in modern warfare, controlling supply movement could be as decisive as controlling army movement. For pilots who flew these missions, the railway campaign represented something more personal. Proof their dangerous work over European railways directly contributed to shortening war and saving Allied lives. Every destroyed locomotive meant fewer supplies reaching German front-line units. Every eliminated ammunition train meant German artillery batteries falling silent. Every blazing fuel tanker meant panzer units running out of gasoline short of objectives. The men climbing into P-47 cockpits day after day, knowing they'd face skilled defenders with increasingly sophisticated weapons, had written a military aviation history chapter influencing tactical thinking for generations. They'd taken a fighter designed for high-altitude air combat and transformed it into its era's most effective ground attack aircraft. In doing so, they'd proven the giant from Long Island, the dinosaur with good proportions, could indeed change history's course, one destroyed locomotive at a time. As the last P-47 Thunderbolt returned from its final railway interdiction mission in May 1945, it marked the end of a campaign that fundamentally altered warfare's nature itself. The lessons learned in European skies about rail network vulnerability, logistics importance in modern combat, and tactical air power's decisive force would shape military doctrine for decades to come. The railway war was over, but its impact on the art of war had only just begun.